We were speaking last time of occultism, black magic, and what is called white magic. Modern science approaching from the other end has been confirming some of the perceptions and findings of the occult seer. Mother points out that some of the discoveries of scientists today are practical confirmations of the vision of the seers of old. Modern science has not satisfied with finding out theoretical possibilities, but has been going ahead applying their perceptions, particularly in the field of medicine, particularly hypnotism. Hypnotism as a substitute for anesthesia. Mother mentions of a case where a skin grafting was called for, and the arm of the poor patient had to be placed touching the legs for about a fortnight without moving. If it had been forcibly bound to the leg, the arm, there was a danger that the person would lose the free movement of that limb. So it was decided to use hypnotism, and a powerful hypnotist was employed who asked the patient just to hold his hand near his leg. And he did it very naturally, without any feeling of strain, and he continued to be under that spell for 15 days. After the purpose was over, he was told, lift up your arm, and he lifted up. There were no after effects, no pain, and everything was natural. So this kind of use of hypnotism and other like methods, they are gradually being adopted in medical science. I personally came to know of a somewhat similar case, though not exactly similar, say about 5 or 6 years ago. A surgeon in Calcutta, he told me, he himself was operating, and the patient had been hypnotized. As an experiment, anesthesia was not given. And as he was operating on the table, the effect of hypnotism ceased. So naturally the patient started shouting, screaming in pain, and hurriedly they had to summon their professional anesthetist, who did his part, and thereafter the operation went on. So he asked me to ask Mother why it happened. Because he said, by experiment they had found out that the type of hypnotic spell that was cast should have lasted for much more than the time required for the operation. Why did it fail? They couldn't explain. So when I mentioned the case to mother and asked, she said, the subconscious of the man must have all along resisted this hypnotic power. So all that they could do, it could hold only the other parts. So when it came to the level of subconscious, it rejected it, and the man had to suffer. That is the use to which one can put hypnotism. The question is whether it is right, whether it is spiritual to use hypnotism as a means. Mother says that it depends upon the intention. There is what you may call a humanitarian use of hypnotism, when you do it in the interest of the subject. But if you do it to exert your will upon somebody else, maybe for show, maybe for your own satisfaction, regardless of the state of the subject, that is inadvisable. But in the interest of the person concerned, there is nothing at all wrong spiritually from the use of hypnotism. The one point still left out, which we have not touched in our study of occultism, is, can anybody and everybody learn occultism? Mother asked the counter question, can anybody and everybody learn painting, write poetry? She says, as far as the technique is concerned, one may know, one may learn. But in these matters, one must have a certain inborn capacity for it. Some people are born with that capacity. Only they succeed and turn out to be adepts, successful. And in some cases, when one touches the depths of the being, say the psychic depths, latent possibilities, latent powers, they blossom. And some of these occult capacities, they manifest. Mother mentioned the case of a girl whom she knew in France. She said she was an ordinary girl, not much educated, but she used to have contact with the psychic at times as a result of the discipline that she was following. And when she was in those periods, she would write beautiful language, she would write beautiful poetry. But when the psychic contact was not there, whatever she wrote was completely banal and ordinary. Mother cites this instance as an illustration of how capacities reveal themselves and function when we contact our inner depths. There lies the springs of some of these powers. It is not that everyone who has these powers has the psychic contact. It may be the person is born with them. It may be someone has gifted those powers to him, some teacher, somebody whom he has come into contact. But these are possibilities, an inborn gift, transmission by some adepts, or the pressure exerted by contact with the inner psychic depths. The next question is, how far spiritual experience can be formulated in terms of mind, described, explained systematized. It is impossible for the mind or the faculties of the mind to fully grasp a spiritual experience. Experience at a level of consciousness which is beyond itself. In the very act of putting the experience into mental terms, there is a diminution, there is a dilution. We tend to leave out or misinterpret those elements which don't fit in with our preconceived mental theories. Mental preferences and prejudices, they play a great part in formulating such an experience. Does that mean then that we should not mentally evaluate a spiritual experience at all? Mother says no. Believing as we do in an integral perfection and transformation, the mind also must be given a chance, must be trained to play its role. And for that, a spiritual experience must be imposed on the mind instead of the mind imposing itself on the spiritual experience. The mind must be exposed to the spiritual vibrations, spiritual experience. And care should be taken that it does not interfere. At least when the experience takes place, the mind must not be allowed to pass judgment. This may be that, this may be this. Let the mind do it if it wants after the experience ceases. Let the experience register itself without interference from below. Otherwise, the mind attenuates the experience. The mind has to enlarge itself, show its flexibility, so that the spiritual experience settles itself in the mental layers and it finds its own expression. At the moment, the mental language may be inadequate, but still there will be some hints by which the spiritual experience will be registered and capable of being rendered into the mental language. Speaking of the mind and its development, we have to distinguish between the mind and the brain. Normally, one confuses the mind and the brain. They say it is the brain that uses the mind, whereas the truth is otherwise. The brain is a physical organ which should be cultivated, should be given exercise, as they say, and developed. The more the brain is exercised, the more the muscles of the brain grow, and Mother says elsewhere that new cells are formed when you compel the brain to exert itself beyond its present limits. There has to be a consistent prodding of the brain, always to stretch itself a little more than its maximum capacity, so that new grooves are formed. That is why Mother often used to say, whether you understand life divine or not, whether you understand sharing those supramental manifestation or not, still you go on reading. The knowledge, the power that is behind the knowledge, presses itself on the brain, and after a reading or two, you will find something registers itself in the brain cells. So this persistent development of the brain is a part of the development of the mind. Mind is larger than the brain, and consciousness is larger than the mind. Mother does not accept the position taken by certain authorities that each one is born with certain capacities of the brain and he should accept and function within those limits. She says no. Like other parts of the system, the brain also is a developing organism, and it can and should be developed. Unless that is coaxed, encouraged and forced to grow, it cannot participate in the enlargement of consciousness. Another difficulty of the mind, as far as spiritual experience is concerned, is that it does not realize words are poor media to formulate spiritual experience. Much of it is ineffable. It is something to be realized, to be felt, but you cannot transmit that experience through words. Spiritual experience is something to be felt. Words can only be indices, like press buttons. Unless you have that experience, or there is somebody who can communicate that experience to you, words do not mean anything. I recall Ramakrishna Paramahamsa explaining how if anybody says sugar is sweet, those words do not give us the experience of that sweetness of sugar. Either we have to taste the sugar, but the words can be a lead, an index to the knowledge that the sugar is sweet. They can take us to that, but actually we have to eat this sugar and experience. Second, the mind always goes compartmentalized. It is difficult for it, to the mental logic, to conceive of a simultaneous existence of two orders of reality within oneself. The mental logic says that the reality, the divine, is absolute. You can't define it. Some say you can, it is in this world. The scientists say this is the reality and not something abstract. That it is possible for the reality to be absolute at one level and manifest itself in number of relativities at another level, and both can exist simultaneously, is something that the logical categories of mind do not admit. We have to keep these limitations of the mind in view. You are in a hurry? You are just now come. As I was saying, the mind has its limitations. Still, the mind has a role to play. But we must know that what we find radical achievements in spiritual life, they cannot be got by reasoning, by reading only, by speculation, but by aspiration. Mother says that a single moment of intense concentration is enough to break through all the barriers that mental doubt, mental disbelief is likely to erect. Then another precaution that she wants the seekers to take is never impose your experience upon others. Simply because one person has realized the divine or the reality in a particular form, don't insist upon everybody else accepting that mold for his growth. That is the bane of most religions. The original founder of the religion or the person with whom the religion started, he had a particular experience or a realization. He formulated that realization in terms of certain philosophy, and that is, each founder tried to impose that on the rest of humanity, saying that this is the truth and nothing else. Ultimately, such an approach only defeats the purpose, and this mistake of institutionalized religions shall not be repeated in spiritual life. In spiritual life, her way, Mother's way, is show the road, open the door, but each one must walk the road. That is precisely her way of doing things. The broad framework is given, the ideal to be realized is kept before you. As a result of her grace and pressure, the inner doors are opened. Thereafter, each one has to pursue the path. The divine's help is there necessarily, but each one has to proceed according to his nature, according to his previous preparation. But all the while he must have the faith that the grace is in action. It is because of the grace that one has seen the road or been shown the road, the doors have been opened and set on the journey. And one has to trust to that grace to guide one further. For this is the answer for those who ask, what is the practical discipline in the ashram? Why is it that there are no functions, each day fixed functions at certain timings, like collective prayers, collective devotional songs, discussions, lectures, and all that? That is not the way of a yoga which aspires to be the way of life of the whole of humanity at some stage in its evolution. Yoga today must cease to be the concern of a specialist. It has to be inbuilt in our way of living. Because this yoga does not aim at salvation from life, liberation from life, but at fulfillment of life, perfection of life. So, the technique of yoga has to be integrated with the technique of living, physical living, vital living, and mental living. All of those have to be integrated with each other with the yogic knowledge and the yogic practice. Speaking of spiritual perfection, the question is asked, what about moral perfection? Is moral perfection of any relevance at all? Some seem to imagine that without passing through the stage of moral perfection, one can jump straight into a spiritual dimension. They cite certain writings of Mother, saying that after all, moral perfection is mental, is a sattvic enlightenment. It has nothing to do with spirituality. But Mother plainly says in her writings here that it is a necessary stage in the evolution of consciousness. The particular qualities that are associated with moral perfection, like mental harmony, seeking of points of agreement, mental enlightenment, equanimity, these are all necessary stages, and nobody can achieve spiritual liberation or perfection unless one has arrived at this moral perfection, call it by whatever means. It may not be spiritual perfection, but the development in the moral sense is indispensable. Our being has got to be cultured and prepared in those respects. The difficulty is people who have moral perfection in the world, they tend to stay put. They are complacent. They feel they have arrived and that's the end of it. They may be saints, they may be sages who won't do harm to anybody, who have good feeling, love for everyone, who won't tell falsehood, and all that kind of thing. But that is not the final fulfillment. If we keep in mind that this too is a stage and a necessary stage, then things fall into their proper pattern. Mother cites the danger of indulgence in the name of freedom. For those who do not believe in moral perfection, moral development, they always are exposed to the danger of dissipating themselves, their energies, in the name of freedom. We have to attain to the highest in humanity first before we can exceed humanity. You cannot jump a stage. It is a fantasy to think that we can jump. The evolutionary spirit will not admit it, will not permit it. You will have to come back and do that homework. Once you believe in spiritual evolution, Each step has to be worked out. Then there is the question whether there are any, this is important, there are many states between man and superman, or man develops into a superman immediately. You will kindly keep in mind the distinction that I had once made between superman and the supramental being. The superman is different and the supramental being is different. A superman is he who is born in the human way, who is trying to transform his nature as much as possible into a divine nature. By dint of his effort, by the action of grace, he arrives at a stage when he is most successful, which is the highest that can be reached by one who has the normal human birth. He is a superman. But not all who make the attempt arrive at that stage. In each person so born, Mother points out, there is always a race between the force of transformation and decay. The body goes on aging. Now, who is to go first to the goal, transformation or decay? In most cases, it is decay that prevails, necessitating what Mother calls a provisional end to the march. These observations she has made in 1958. 15 years before she left her body. It's very prophetic. She says there are many partial realizations before one becomes a superman. So those who make the attempt may be called apprentice superman. Everyone is an apprentice. What is developed inside, they try to apply materially, apply to the body. They succeed to a certain extent. But there is always on the other side this pull downwards, the force of disintegration and decay, and leading ultimately to a stage when the body becomes so disintegrated that it becomes unfit to participate in that experiment. And when that happens, she says, there is a provisional end to the march. And she makes a profound observation in these matters. It is the final step that will count. If the final step has not been taken, things have not been done. You may call it postponement, you may call it suspension, whatever language you choose. The fact remains, to use her own words, there is a provisional end to the march. What stages we cross, what stages we stabilize, she says, we who participate in that experiment, we cannot say. We are involved in it. It is for a future historian to look back, say 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, such and such a thing happened, humanity crossed beyond these things, they passed through these stages. But we who are involved in it, we cannot say. So that is where we will stop today.
From Sankhya to Gita, nature of mind is described in different ways, but the brain is not mentioned anywhere. It may be mentioned like this.
No, they say brain is part of Prakriti. They don't distinguish. Brain is taken to be part of the body. And Manas is the sixth sense. So they don't make these distinctions. Gita already goes beyond the Sankhyan psychology.
After experiences doubt or the mind becomes active in other ways, which is not have for a few seconds or minutes of deep concentration, concentration on what?
Aspiration, what you want to achieve. That makes a breakthrough. There is a follow-up action is necessary thereafter, but that affects a breakthrough.
Himself was Gnostic, still he believed in morality, truth and excellence. Is it possible to be moral and spiritual when one is Gnostic?
Spiritual you can't be in our sense. Certainly moral one can be without believing in God. But spiritual means you believe in God. One can say one has spiritual qualities without being necessarily spiritual. For instance, Jawaharlal Nehru. Now he did not believe. At any rate, he used to say that he did not believe in God and divine and all that. But he was a godly man. He manifested so many qualities, so many traits of a highly developed being. Sri Aurobindo said he was a Brahminical soul. Brahminical means he was arrived at that fine stage. And perhaps he said he will take to spiritual life in his next birth. But he had many spiritual qualities about him. You can never think of Nehru telling a lie, for instance. You can never think of Nehru shrinking in cowardice. How many people can do that? You won't tolerate an injustice. So it is possible to have spiritual qualities without having a spiritual faith. But it is only a veil which can be removed either by a shock, if he is intended to take to spiritual life in this birth, or it points to the possibility of the next birth. Ultimately, in the West, for instance, there are those who don't say God. They speak in terms of consciousness. Development of cosmic consciousness. They say no spirit business here. We believe in consciousness. The consciousness can grow. Just as our ideas can grow, thoughts can grow, consciousness. So perfectibility of consciousness. We call it perfectibility of spirit. Now, they won't admit that they are spiritual. We insist on calling them spiritual. It is a difference in nomenclature.
You mentioned the need to develop the mind and the fact that new cells can be added if the mind is taken beyond. In this environment, I wonder if you would make any comment about what you thought some of the catalysts for the development.
Never to rest content with reading books that we understand. Part of our reading must be to read things which we find it difficult to understand. There you stretch the muscles. Repeated reading, it forces them to expand those cells. That is necessary.
What about poetry? One says that one can understand it only with the heart and not through the mind.
But that heart understanding travels to the mind and it develops the cells.
The mind. But if the mind can understand certain books, but one cannot understand poetry because of the text,
It is a mental resistance. Mental resistance. So one can understand from where one is ready. But still it will have an indirect effect on the mind. It will have.
Sometimes people who can read, go on reading abstract and philosophical things, when they start reading poetry, they become nervous and angry. Even
Is it so?
because, yeah, sometimes I don't know whether it's an emotional resistance or what. How can that really be explained?
People accustomed to reading philosophy reacting badly to poetry. You see, the philosophical ego, the ego of knowledge that is developed by reading philosophy, it always promotes a certain egoity in the mind of being in possession of a superior knowledge which other people don't have. Now that ego reacts to poetry, painting and such fine arts as a waste of time, as a lower manifestation, and they look askance at it. So it is more or less an action of a superiority complex. Shirendra describes somewhere how the people who do jnana yoga, yoga of knowledge, look down with disdain on people who worship, saying that they are in the lower category of seekers of whom they will never be one.
Or it maybe also if one grows up in a society where one is not used to show emotions.
It is also. It is what may be called the Teutonic mind. They look upon these things as sissy, feminine,